I like to talk about in women, and I don't want to give you a sort of historical profile of all of the women that have been mentioned. I'd like to throw out a couple of other names that we as women, black women, and women of color don't hear about. That's exactly who Claudia Jones was.
Tommy.
Well, Claudia Jones was a Marxist. And she was very active during the time of Paul Robeson. She went to the Soviet Union. She was later on deported by the United States government, and she went to England. Why don't we just have you chime in here?
She also fought for women's liberation within the
Carol,
Communist Party.
I didn't have my glasses on. Carol, okay.
That's it.
Oh, okay, and what we need to understand, you know
she
what
wrote about women's liberation.
She wrote about women's liberation, and what she did in England, she started the carnival. How many of you knew that? That was Claudia Jones, that Pinko who did that. That Marxist who did that. There is some. Oh, yes.
I grew up in England and I've never heard of Claudia Jones.
Oh dear, dear, dear. So well, that goes to show you what it is.
Completely erased from English history.
Yeah, that
I had trouble finding her in American history too. It's hard.
She's Marxist in the South and painted with that brush red. You lucky to find her at all.
That's right. That's right.
Well, there is, in fact, a documentary on Claudia Jones, and I would suggest that folks Google that in, and you can find all about Claudia Jones. But what was so interesting was her trip to the Soviet Union when she went with Paul Robeson and a number of other folks, because there's so much of this history that you just can't go into, just even the gender issues at that time, even though there were folks like Paul Robeson who were understanding. Another Marxist woman who embraced Marxism was the wife of W.E.B. Du Bois. Everybody knows that, right? So somebody want to take that on? Sebukwe, you want to talk it? Anybody about who was Du Bois's wife? That's right. That's right.
Last wife.
His last wife. Well, when we say wife, we don't mean the first or the second. We mean the last. And she was a Marxist. And so often we have Black History Month and we just do not go beyond Rosa Parks. We don't go beyond, the standard sheroes. And all of this is easy for the historians because what they don't have to deal with and what they don't have to talk about is ideology. What were their political leanings? It's not just, Harriet Tubman and all of that. All of that is wonderful, but what is the progression and evolution of our struggle in terms of an ideological framework, if you will? And what is it about that historic ideological framework that we know so little about? And the women, the great women who played a role in that. We talked, Colia mentioned Ida B. Wells. Well, what was so incredible about her was she was a journalist. She did just amazing things. She would go into the South by herself to report on lynchings. And we have to remember it wasn't only Black men who were lynched, it was also women.
And pregnant women too.
Yeah.
And a baby as young as 9 months old.
That's what I just said.
Not only one, numbers of them.
It is my turn, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
All right.
You should talk about lynching.
We'll discipline, sisters. Okay. Okay, and so I'm going to sum up pretty quickly. But it's very important that we understand this. It's very important that we understand the key role that a woman like Ella Baker played in the civil rights movement. She was consulted, she was the leader. People like Stokely Carmichael and Jim Foreman, they were consulting her, even Dr. King.
She founded the Southern Christian Leadership.
Oh, Harold,
Thank
I
you.
was coming to that.
Sorry.
Thank you. Harold, by the way, is an old friend. She's written a number of books, and she is deep into women's liberation and red stockings. And just before I sign off, I want to sum up a little bit about red stockings, since we're talking about women. Now, everybody in this room has heard of the top-notch feminist, Gloria Steinem.
Oh, yeah.
There isn't a girl or woman in this room who has not heard of Gloria Steinem. Are there people in this room who have not heard of Gloria Steinem? Well, how many of you are aware of Gloria Steinem's 10-year association with the CIA?
Yeah, I heard about that.
10-year association with the CIA. Well, you would know it because we published it in our newspaper.
Yes, yeah.
And then they came after us with 10 feet plus 40 guns and tried to put us in jail and stuff like that. How many of you have heard of Michelle Wallace? Now how many? Well, I'd say young sisters. How old are you?
Okay,
How old are you?
thank you.
Well, darling, I meant those just a little bit younger than you. That's all.
I am but young now.
That's me.
Okay, so sister, now this is very, very important here. We're having a sort of interactive discussion here.
Well,
So what do you know about Michelle Wallace?
I've just become like more introduced into Black feminism. I'm doing a piece on it. So right now I'm reading Patricia Hill Collins' Black feminist book, and then I'm reading Michelle Wallace, the myth, the Black superhero. And I've read like books and things like that. So she's my next book. So I just got that, Michelle Wallace. After Collins.
You had bell hooks?
Bell hooks, yeah, I've read bell hooks, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But I wanted to get to a bit more of the edgy stuff that people don't generally hear
And that's how
about.
I knew about Ella Baker and Collins' book, and she wrote a letter to King, I believe, urging him to address like the topic of women and women being on the front line, and he supposedly read it aloud, and like they laughed at it.
Our political consciousness and honing in on those issues that impact us as a people and also as women. How many of you know about these so-called progressive Black politicians who are against abortion? I mean, you know, is that you know, you're talking about anti-imperialism, but you come up and you don't have a position on abortion rights, or you don't have a position on gay rights. Well, you're not a progressive. You're not a progressive, no matter what people say. So how do we begin to understand this political terrain that is before us? How do we understand it as women? How do we understand it as women of color? How do we relate to our white sisters, many of whom are just as racist as the men?
Yes.
Many of whom who have no qualms about putting down Black women. No qualms whatsoever, who are just as blatant in their racism as anybody, as any racist that you would find. How do we begin to deal with that? And at the same time, how do we approach it from a position of unity while we work through these historical problems, and none more powerful and prominent than that of race? Thank you.
I'll just take a few minutes to focus on the toolbox part of it, and how we have to move, how the kinds of ways we need to be moving in order to move towards liberation and social justice in this country and the world. Number one, I think it's very important that we use the social media, because the young people are the future of any movement, and social media is what young people do. I started posting political things on Facebook probably months ago, and I post everything on Facebook. And sometimes I post things several times a week because you know Facebook, the stuff disappears and whatnot if you don't know how to find it. But also, I just learned that we should, we may be able to form albums of political topics within Facebook, and that would be able to access the subject matter. I don't use Twitter. I mean, I don't think you can say much in 140 characters. That means anything. The more, I just earlier today I went to the funeral of a woman named Gwendolyn Braxton, and now she's one of our many unsung, little-known heroes for the National Black Women's Health Project. That's the project. Many of you, some of you, will be a little more familiar with Billy Avery, the name of Billy, who started the National Black Women's Health Project. And that is a reminder that, especially we as activists and everybody, we have to integrate we have to find some balance between our personal existences, our health, for example, and so forth, and the rest of our lives. And so activists have to do a really much better job. Gwendolyn Braxton epitomized that integration and balance of political activism and personal well-being activism. And we have to find space for some of that. Otherwise, you know, we have the early transitions and so forth. I think it's the last thing maybe that I'll really mention. It needs more than a mention. The left forum is a critical example of the continuation of the absence of people of color in the organizing and the agenda setting and so forth, and leadership of what we're supposed to be about, the liberation and the social justice that we're supposed to be about, locally, nationally, and worldwide. And I don't have to repeat that we are not going to go anywhere. The Mumia struggle is an example of how well the international forces have been brought to bear on an issue of social justice. And we have to do that with all of the issues of social justice that confront us. And we have to do that by putting the issues of the 90% of the people on the planet who are living on, some $1 a day or 30 cents a day. It's ridiculous, and we have to come at social justice work from that vantage point, not from the vantage point of people in the United States, and particularly of white people in the United States. That is not going to get it. It's not going to cut it. So I'll stop there.
All right, looking at tools and skills. Nellie really talked about the evolution to the Marxist interpretation, am I right? Being able to get a Marxist analysis, critical Marxist analysis, that's a tool. Sandra has come right down here to face with us and talking about the social media. Those are tools, those are skills, those are techniques, those are things that are urgently needed if we're going forward. There may be other ideologies too, so I'm not just Marxism, I'm throwing it out there. Don't say Cola said it was just Marxism. Please don't. I have to deal with my African socialists. So, we need to go forward. Any questions so far? Because we need to be talking about it. You just jump in here because we need the tools, the skills, the techniques. If my sisters and my brothers, we are going to organize a revolutionary struggle in the United States. in the hour of a major genocide being practiced on African, indigenous, and it's assumed that they're through with indigenous, but not yet, indigenous and Latino people, and more Asians as well, and poor white folks. So we really need to begin to talk about this, and I say to sisters, you know, revisit the black women of the 1890s, because they developed the black women's club movement that would make Ida B. Wells' work powerful, accessible, and heard. So, sisters, you get a choice. Now we're gonna let Mama Rice talk. We're gonna let Mama talk.
There is so much that out there. One of the things, and it's down at the bottom, is the fact that the reason I'm glad that I can speak on it, because I am a little tired of seniors and how they're being treated, mistreated, and how they're throwing you out of these houses, stabilized houses, and nobody's fighting or no one is talking. You don't hear anyone saying anything about it, and not doing anything. That's how what made me sort of move out here and just do a whole lot of things. Let me tell you how I started. I was a union member. I was 15 in the ILGW, and at that time, Adam Powell was having a hearing, and my business agent told me that if I testified in the hearing that was coming up, I wouldn't have a job. Well, at that time, you know, I think most of the time, you think about, you have to raise your daughter, your children, and other people the same. I'm not the only one. And what are you going to do? Are you going to testify? Are you going to go against it? And I decided that I was, because with the word, me being told by a white man that I couldn't talk with Adam and that I couldn't go to be a part of that hearing. I did. That hearing was held on 114th Street and between 7th and Lenox. 7th and Lenox, or 7th and 8th. But it was then that I began to recognize that you could not let someone else tell you what you could do, what you could not do. And as a result of, that's how I found myself. I was lucky enough to meet people like Flo Kennedy and many other people that just helped to give you more guts. So it concerns me. Right now, what concerns me is to know that how I was evicted out my apartment. Not only was I evicted, but just to see how most, especially I'll say women, seniors, who won't fight, and they're being put out. A woman told me I think there's almost 48,000 people in shelters. That's terrible. When they're renting out like 620.
About 40,000 on any given night. You're right, 40,000 on any given night are in the city shelter system.
They had one
Yeah, another 40,000 on
One
the street.
woman, the landlord made a hole in her ceiling, and where all the water came down, she had to, two nights she slept in the street. So this is the kind of thing that sort of bothers, and it appears nobody says anything about it. And I would say, right now, that's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about seniors being evicted. That's your mother and your grandmother and your great-grandmother being put out and being forced to live in shelters. So I would say that's what I'm concerned about. There's a lot of things I'm concerned, but right now,
Yeah, and about seniors being forced to do mental test and been told that they needed a
Oh,
mental
yeah.
evaluation, psychological
Oh, yeah.
evaluation.
Well, that's another thing they're doing with our children. They're giving them these, what is it, these, the test. And they're already deciding what, and it bothers me because I don't hear that happening too much in other communities in reference. So therefore, you're labeled, and now our young people so far, they've been labeling them. They make sure they get a record, so therefore they're no good for the future. So those are the kind of issues that I find myself concerned with, because let me just speak on this. I've been very upset over the charter schools.
Yeah.
Because the charter schools are the corporations,
That's right.
and they're
That's right.
running everything, and no one is.
Right, exactly right.
So, what I was told by someone some years ago, that the children in the Bronx, was getting better education than the children in Harlem. And you can see that because they've just given out a report of our children, so they're not educating them. So therefore, I'll be gone, but I would like to see people take those things up as an issue, because it's important. It's our future.
That's right.
And one issue we need to take up, young people, is Miss Rice needs a biography.
That's
And
right.
there's no better skill. But for urgent skill, she needs a biography.
Oh,
She needs a legacy. We all do. Anybody in this room over 50 needs to begin to talk about the biography stuff. I have to do it. But she needs it. It's urgent that we get some young person in here who is interested in writing, and let us begin to deal with that. We can do it as a group where you got more than one person that you are doing at a time. That biographies need to be done so that the legacy of her work, that pile of skills, that battery of skills, those tools, those resources, Pam Africa said that she needs a biography.
That's right.
We need some biography.
Pam is a fearless warrior who humbles me every time. I'm a PhD historian, went to Columbia and Brown University. And Pam Africa, who probably doesn't have a high school education, has sustained a movement for 30 years that kept the state from killing one of the most important voices
That's right.
in the world, that of Mumia Abu-Jamal.
That's right.
Every time that woman takes the stage, I learn something. And she has a brilliant mind, but she speaks from the platform of life and humanity. And that's what makes her effective, and that's what makes us want to hear her speak every time she speaks. And that's part of what Black women bring, and brown women, to the conversation, which is about women and collective action. And that is part of what I think Black women and brown women bring to this conversation. And those essences we see in history. In the history of the women that you've identified. I want to just say here that we have to remember that Marx studied early societies and their collective character and their democratic character. We don't, in Africa and in Native American societies. And so the idea of communism comes out of this experience.
That's exactly right.
And so when we talk about building a completely different society, a communist society, a socialist society, driven by human need and collective action that puts need and the community in front of profit. We're talking about early society in Africa. But too often, in the African American community, communism and socialism is thought of as something outside of us, when in fact, this emerges out of our experience. I think that part of what Black women in particular contribute to this conversation is a refusal to allow oppression and exploitation and the difficulties of life mangle and distort our humanity and diminish us. And you've probably seen the film Long Distance Revolutionary, which is a brilliant film. I think it's Alice Walker who says this in that film, that if you cannot be moved by our common humanity, then it's you who's got the problem and who's distorted. So I think that's part of what Black women bring to this conversation. Strategies of survival, our humanity, a celebration of life, and work. Because when you have to survive, there's no popping bonbons into your mouth. It's work, and you're working around the clock, and there's no time. Even when you're resting, you're thinking about what's the next step forward. And this is really dramatized in the lives of Harriet Tubman, but also Ella Baker. I just want to go back to Ella Baker because one of the contributions of Ella Baker was the sense that if we are going to liberate the human race, we have to build collective leadership in movements, right? And it was Ella Baker who was single-handedly responsible for the emergence of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the idea that we can't leave it to the Lord, which in that period was Martin Luther King. That's what the SNCC kids called Martin Luther King, the Lord. That we needed to be the authors of our own liberation, and we need to build leadership in ourselves, and we are who we've been waiting for. And that is a tradition that then was carried in the 60s by the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords. And most of you probably know that I do an enormous amount of work on the case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. In Mumia Abu-Jamal's book, We Want Freedom, Chapter 7, he talks about the women of the Panthers. And it was the women of the Panthers, even though we only see the men, who sustained that organization and all of its programs.
And were the majority of them.
And were the majority. They operated the breakfast programs. They operated the health clinics. They figured out what was going to be done on that day and how. And Cleo Silvers, who was a member of both the Young Lords and the Black Panthers, I'm sure will talk about that. So Black women contribute, and brown women, and women generally, white women, and Asian women, they contribute the sense that we need to uphold our humanity, that we need to think about the collective before the individual, that we need to build sisterhood and unity, and that all of it emerges out of this fountain of love for other human beings. And that's kind of what I've learned in this movement. I mean, I'm an academic ultimately. I emerged as an activist when I was in my teens, and I was a huge activist in college. I participated in this. I came of age by taking over a building at Brown University. I was part of a movement called Students for Aid and Minority Admission, and we were protesting the fact that Brown looked at people's ability to pay in the admissions process, which meant that a disproportionate number of Brown students were excluded on the basis of race because we were disproportionately poor. So we occupied a building, and that's how I emerge. But then I go into the university to become a professor, and the university has an ability to strip the writer and the historian of their humanity. And so what I gained from the movement, the Mumia movement, and from the leadership of Pam and Ramona, is both an analysis of the world that is unequivocal and uncompromising. What side are you on? You are either, on the side of freedom, equality, and justice and democracy, or you are not. And Pam talks about this in very plain words. But she also always talks about the life force, what she calls Mama Earth, and life and love. I just want to end by saying that I made a film called Justice on Trial, The Case of Mumia Abu-Jamal. The last person I interviewed was Lydia Barashengo, Mumia's sister. And that was probably the most important interview for me in this work and for the film. After having interviewed everyone and their mother, who knows anybody about this case, lawyers, historians, movement people, we interviewed her. She was in her final stages of life with cancer, and she decided that she was going to do the interview without a wig. I don't know if you've seen my documentary. What I learned from that documentary, Mumia brought to her love. So Mumia would storm into the house, and he would bear hug his mother, and the mother would say, get out of here, boy. And so in the process of that interview, someone who we think about as an icon, as larger than life, Mumia, I began to see him as a human being. And then I had a conversation with the editor of Justice on Trial, and I said, what we need to do to Mumia is get him out of his pedestal and humanize him before the world. On the flip side of that, Mumia is a hero, a god, and icons, and black women, and poor people in general, they're depicted also in an unhuman way as free agents, savages, criminals, dangerous. And this is what black women have done historically, is to highlight our common humanity. And that's a struggle. It's an ideological struggle, because the people in power stay in power by scapegoating and dehumanizing the least amongst us.
This is what they're going to do with the Sata.
And this, exactly.
Yeah.
So our job is to subvert ideology and to uphold our common humanity. And that's part of what Ella Baker and Harriet Tubman and all of the women who have kept this people alive, who've been the least amongst us. That's part of what they've done. Thank you.
Thank you.
People that make sure that you eat, the people that make sure that you live from the point of birth. It was women of African descent in this country, in the United States, who were responsible for your living, for your life. And as Kalia talked about, we were the ones that were feeding you. It was not the mothers who had you, but it was black women who were responsible for that. And as a black woman and as a woman of African descent, I think that what I want to convey to you is the specifics of what we had to do, what we've done. When you make that contribution, when you make that sacrifice, it comes back to you in ways that you'll never understand. Let me just say to you that all day long today, I've been kind of involved in the movement that I've been involved in for the last 45 years. The League of Revolutionary Black Workers in the labor movement was one of the most vibrant and impactful organizations in the history of the labor movement in the United States. Y'all don't know about Finally Got the News and Detroit I Do Mine Dying. Please go and check that out because it's so deep and it's so heavy, and it really talks about the role of black workers in labor in the United States. And I was a member of that organization. One of not very many women, although the women, African American and Latino women, are the people that made that organization run. And then the next hour, I spent the next few hours with the Black Panther Party, because they're having a photo shoot of trying to find all the old Black Panthers. The same for the Black Panther Party. One of the organizations in which, if it had not been for the sacrifice, and by the way, just in addition to all the other things that the Black Panther women did besides selling newspapers, we also made sure that the children were taken care of well, that everybody had breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that we maintained all of our households, and we sold as many newspapers as the brothers. And we engaged in organizing, in housing, in healthcare, in education, in every aspect, in every element of life. We were involved and participated, and maintained the organization, and as Johanna said, made sure that the organization moved and that it was organized. And we can have this discussion without talking about what it is that we need to do among ourselves and how it is that we need to strengthen ourselves and each other so that we can take this movement to its logical conclusion in the process of building a better society. So essentially that's all I have to say.
I felt so wounded by so many experiences to the point of like just really pretty much wanting to drop out of activism because I did not feel like it was a safe space. And that's so terrible because I'm in the world to change the world, and that's what I want to say about myself, but looking at the history of slavery and just seeing the amount of strength that it took to survive that, and like you couldn't just drop out, you had to continue to fight and struggle. So I just continue to, you look to various examples like that to say, you can't just give up. And there was this movie Lincoln, and in it they were, trying to pass this equality, the emancipation thing. What it made me think of was like, wow, some people are really, really invested in like not, having equality, legally, but to this day, equality's on whether it's subconscious or whatever, something that's still very threatening, even if we have a black president or whatever. And so, in this, like, how do you proceed? And like, I just think like, how can I tell young activists how to protect yourself from being wounded when you come into this to do good, but like you don't know how to defend yourself against these people who claim to be progressive and claim to have these ideals, but yet really care about their own power and self-interest. So
it is a resistance, a deep resistance in every so-called liberal whatever. I mean, that crap that goes on that calls itself aid to developing countries, I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And we all are going to have to be uncomfortable as we go through it.
All right.